So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be in such an interesting conference, good conference at my own university, the UPM. I am professor here at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid at the Transport Research Center. So there are many points that have been already highlighted by previous people, so I will try to focus on the new aspects that maybe haven't been treated. So first, here you have a graph of how is decarbonizing transport so important. First of all, this graph shows the evolution in the EU from 1990 to the present. You see that all the sectors went down in terms of emissions, but transport is the only one that has grown. And this is because it is the most difficult one to decarbonize because it is very hardly dependent on fossil fuels. In terms of different transportation means, you see that the road is the most important one at the EU level, 71%, followed by aviation and shipping. However, what I want to highlight is that despite the fact that aviation is pretty small, it is the one that has experienced the highest growth. It almost doubled in the last 30 years. And this is not so much because of the efficiency of the planes, but also because of the growth on demand. If we focus on the road sector and we make the analysis sorted by type of vehicles, we see that cars in Europe are the most important ones, but you see also that heavy and light-duty vehicles, they play an important role at the time of decarbonizing. And I want also to highlight that the greatest growth has been experienced by light-duty vehicles. So what solutions do we have to decarbonize? So I want to make a distinction between three different aspects. First, we can act on mobility. One possibility is let's reduce mobility. Another, shift to cleaner modes or take better advantage of the capacity of the vehicles. The second is on the energy side, by increasing energy efficiency in the whole life cycle and also shift to low or zero carbon technologies. And finally, in order to boost the mobility and energy aspects, it is important to use market instruments through higher carbon prices, taxes, incentives to innovation, and different types of actions that may incentivize companies and people to move towards a cleaner transport in the world. So the first question I have is it possible to reduce mobility? So that's a very good issue because maybe we are moving too much, not just in terms of climate change, but also in terms of pollution, congestion, and things like that. The thing is that it is complicated, reducing mobility is pretty complicated without compromising quality of life. I mean, as people become wealthier, they want to move more and more, and they have greater necessities. So we have to act in the market side in order to regulate that. Then it is right that some economies, they show a trend towards decoupling mobility and GDP. Some traditional actions, such as promoting teleworking, teleconferences, urban densification, incentives to live close to the workplace, they are measures that can be effective, but in the last few years, they have failed. And also, we have to pay attention to some breakthrough innovations, such as 3D printing, that can reduce very much the need to move freight over different places. Then, shifting to other modes is the solution. So it is complicated. Taking a look at Europe, that is one of the areas of the world that is putting a much greater stress on reducing CO2, we see that the modal change has been very slight. In the case of freight, it even increased by 5 points. And in the case of passenger, even though there was a slight reduction in passengers, you see that air transportation has almost doubled. So the thing is that there are different modes, such as road transport for last mile, aviation for intercontinental trips, and ship for crossing the ocean, that they have little competition. It is the only way, really, to get to this point. Then another point is taking a better advantage of the capacity of the vehicles. And in terms of mobility, of passenger mobility, it is right that there is a trend to share. We are noticing that new generations, they are used not to buy new cars, and they share electric cars and carpooling. There are plenty of applications that are facilitating that. Then ICT, through mobility as a service, will be able to reduce and to make trips more efficient and to combine personal and public transportation. And then we have the possibility of making larger vehicles. This is particularly important in the case of freight. Larger vehicles are more energy efficient. Then increased efficiency, and we are going to the field of energy, is also a crucial aspect. Here you have a slide I took from the European Environmental Agency that basically shows that if the generation mix is not renewable, we have a big problem, because the electric vehicle will be producing more CO2 if the generation is 1% carbon, and almost the same CO2 if there is a mix of renewable and fossil fuel generation than a conventional vehicle. So to me, one of the key aspects that have been stressed by some of the previous speakers is the development of energy storage technologies. At the end of the day, this is the crucial aspect to take advantage of renewable energy, because we may have an electric car and we have the impression that this car doesn't produce any CO2, but actually, if the source that is generating electricity is producing CO2, we are not solving the problem. Then shift to low carbon technologies. There has been a lot already said in this conference and in this roundtable about it. So what I want to stress is that at the end of the day, the shift needs good infrastructure for recharging. And also the big issue is with the big vehicles, basically planes and trucks, because the weight and the size of the batteries means a real issue for heavy vehicles. There are some initiatives, such as promoting dynamic charging in the road, but this requires autonomous vehicles and new infrastructure design. Of course, there are other options, such as hydrogen and biofuels, that may play an important role. And finally, I wanted to say something about economic incentives, because at the end of the day, this is the things how real economy works. So you have boosting technology means applying economic incentives. So a first comment I may have is that the current mechanisms of cut and trade is somehow not the most effective one. First, because it doesn't reflect the marginal damage produced by GHG emissions. Then, because it is not applicable to all sectors. So in this respect, a good GHG pricing should be harmonized across transport modes in order to make competition efficient, proportional to carbon emissions, so in order that those modes or those means of transport emitting a larger amount of CO2 should pay more, and then applicable to all countries and sectors, and equal to the marginal damage. Of course, we can debate then, this is complicated to apply from one day to the next day, because it has a lot of implication in terms of the balance across rich and poor countries, but this is definitely one of the key aspects to consider. And finally, we could use all the money, or at least part of the money that we get from those market-based incentives to promote innovation, because at the end of the day, the key of decarbonization is to make progress on some of the innovation aspects. Things such as batteries production capacity and recycling, hydrogen, alternative fuels for aviation, dynamic charging in the road, or other aspects that are not directly related to mobility, but may have a large impact on reducing mobility, such as 3D printing in order to approach production and consumption, things such as automation that can increase quite a lot the efficiency of mobility, or synchromodality in the case of freight, in order to take advantage of the capacity of the vehicles and in order to combine different types of different transportation modes according to the reduction of CO2 emissions may highly contribute to improve the process. So thank you very much, and if you have any question after, please let me know.
Thank you, Jose. And now...